I filmed a video a couple days back that was essentially just my stream of consciousness. I turned on the camera and then just blabbered on about my annoyance with both elitism and the rise of anti-intellectualism. And you're about to see it. Past Taj will take you on a journey through our disjointed psyche, and I'll cut in here and there to give you some ground beneath your feet. You deserve it after all. And honestly, both me and Pastage would be pretty mortified if you came away from this video feeling like a Muppet caught in a dishwasher. This is a conversation, I think, about how and why we do or don't take in information. What's my thesis? Don't worry about it. So I'm literally just throwing on the camera right now because I feel like I need to talk, and I'm not sure if this is going to be a YouTube video or a TikTok because I don't know how long I'm going to be talking for. But I think that one of the reasons that have been very disengaged with a lot of online spaces in general, especially online leftist spaces, is the rise of anti-intellectualism, but also I feel like this counterculture of kind of this really intense elitism, this academia elitism coming from the opposite side. Obviously, I think that it's very annoying that there's so many people who think they know what they're talking about, but are actually loud and wrong. I have been very mad about that too, because I have also in my personal life, not online, but in my personal life, been warning every nigga that I know, every single person that I know, that we was gonna get here. I knew that we was gonna get here socially. I warned of this years and years and years ago. I'd say years ago. I mean, I was able to see this shit in high school and out of high school and tell people that, oh, so fascism? And now, no one believed me. No one will believe that we would get to this point. And so we're here. And even now, people still don't believe we got to this point. Honestly, I didn't even want to believe we got to this point. I literally had to watch, I watched Ian Danskin's, the recent video, the alt-right playbook, where he also was just like, I didn't want to, when do we say that we're here? When is our line? Inwardly, I felt like my line was a while ago, but then it was nobody else's line. And so since it was nobody else's line, I was like, oh, maybe I'm just being extra. I say all this to say that as someone who very much values information, that very much values academia, that is now back in school and is aiming to be a communicator, I get this anger, this resentment, this annoyance with so much of American culture being centered around this idea of brawn over academia elitism. Well, that's new, because it's not a thing. Okay, I'm being a little hard on myself here. I simply misspoke. The concept of elitism is something that in both scientific and academic fields is seen by experts as a sort of necessary evil, while it's seen by the public as annoying as shit. For example, in this study done by Antonio Laverghetta at St. Leo University, he poses the question, should access to higher education become increasingly egalitarian in nature, or should it be hierarchical with strict academic standards? See, to us, or maybe it's just me specifically, I don't know, this sounds like a shitty question, right? Access to higher education and access to education in general has historically been barred from many on racial and class lines alone. So, of course, access to higher education should be increasingly egalitarian in nature to allow access to as many people as it possibly can. Laverghetta believed that due to a combination of anti-elitist sentiments and the consumerist attitudes of late-stage capitalism, that would make the students in his sample more prone to anti-intellectualism, classroom incivility, and academic entitlement. Laverghetta seeked to make a connection between the four, believing that students in the sample that scored higher on the anti-intellectualism scales would then score higher on all of the other scales across the board. Yes, all of these things were made into measurable scales. Sociologists really like their scales. And he wasn't wrong, at least based off of his sample study. Students who saw college as a product that they bought were also more likely to beg professors for undeserving higher grades, or more likely to be deliberately distracted during classes, like doing other classes' homework in one class. And were also more likely to take less academic responsibility when it came to their education. I question why exactly, like, a lot of kids who scored high on the board of anti-intellectualism scored high across the board. I question if external factors like repeated academic failure or low self-esteem might be some of the reason why a lot of these students were less likely to take responsibility when it came to education and more likely to reach out for help in these ways. Like, he even made it a point that kids with higher GPAs overall, higher GPAs coming from high school into college, were more likely to score lower on the anti-intellectualism scale and lower on all of the other scales across the board. But that's not something that was being measured in this, so I digress. The definition that Laverghetta used for anti-intellectualism was very broad. I'm going to read this directly off my laptop because it's kind of a mouthful. A dislike of rational thought and abstract reasoning and a correspondence preference for concrete and practical thinking. Okay, it actually wasn't that hard. I just couldn't remember. This was the definition of anti-intellectualism coined by Eigenberger and Sealander in their 2001 creation of the Student Anti-Intellectualism Survey, a survey that just presented students with a bunch of statements and asked them to rate it on a scale of agreement. But what is considered rational thought and rational thinking? Both of these studies seem to focus exclusively on students' relationships with their college professors, how their questioning of their authority could lead to this lack of respect. Some of the statements included, "Some of my college professors are okay, but on a whole, I don't really care for them." Honestly, it kind of just sounds like college professors passing out notes to their students that say, "Do you like me? Check yes or no." My point is, the methods used in these surveys specifically talk about anti-intellectualism within the context of higher education, and for our purposes, we need to be able to look at it on a broader scale. To find both a definition and an application that more suits our conversation, bars, I look towards this essay written by Eric Merkley, where he described anti-intellectualism as a generalized mistrust of intellectuals and experts. I'm pretty sure that whenever we're talking about anti-intellectualism now, this is generally the definition that we're thinking about. In this essay, through various methods, Merkley provides evidence to show, one, the link between anti-intellectualism in opposition to scientific consensus, two, that anti-intellectualism actually affects the way that people perceive consensus cues, that being language used by experts to signify scientific and expert consensus. And three, that anti-intellectualism has a direct link to populism, defined as anti-elitism, or a negative perception towards elites for whatever reason, though it's notably not the exclusive cause. This essay kind of confirmed what a lot of us who bemoan loud and wrong niggas were already intuiting, that being that anti-intellectualism tends to make people anti-science, that this fear and hostility towards a nebulously defined elite could make people more prone and open to anti-intellectualist sentiments, and that, most scary, people who are deeply entrenched in this sentiment are more likely to push back even harder when all experts say that they agree on a thing. Like climate deniers, an actual example used within the essay. Because of their distrust of elites who aren't Donald Trump, if they were told by literally every expert in the world that the world is heating up at a significant rate and we finna die in like 20 years, that would actually be confirmation to them that the Democrats are trying to hide the truth, that they want to take away their meat, their cars, and their guns, and make them all into sad, pathetic soy boy lesbians ready and apt to serve our gender fluid overlords. Experts tend to be classified as the elite simply because of their sway on policy and sometimes their visibility, and so anti-elite sentiment tends to bleed into people's view of experts as well. That's actually why, though we see more obvious examples within conservative spheres, anti-intellectual sentiment can cross party lines and be swayed by any political ideology. Another example that was used in the essay was people's opinions on nuclear power. The scientific consensus on nuclear power is that it's a completely safe form of energy and is better to use than every fossil fuel ever. But when asked, a lot of people on the more liberal end of the scale actually disagreed with scientific consensus more than that of their conservative counterparts. This makes sense, as Democrats have historically been divided on the issue of nuclear power for years now, often putting out messages that are in opposition to the scientific consensus. That being said, I feel like people have a pretty good reason to be a little anti-elite right now. Not only is it there that cultural thing, but I think on the opposite end too with academia, there's this idea where it's like, okay, I'm an expert, I am smarter than you. I am smarter than you. I have know more than you. I deserve more than you. And the information that I give you is always correct and I am infallible. That is how when you go into any expert, like to be any expert in any field, you are taught to act. You're taught to act like you know better. Because a lot of times you do. You have more knowledge than a lot of people that are available in whatever specific area that you're studying. You're trained to act like, oh, like, because I'm more knowledgeable though, that means that I'm better than you. Like that, the academic elitism is very, very strong. And that's something that's also been reinforced in our media. A lot of times these movies that surround like smart people, intellectuals being bullied, the intellectual is like, oh, woe is me. And then they get this whole arc where they end up saving the whole day with their intellect. And it's like, yeah, exactly. I knew better. I am better. It's always about being better or worse, like being smarter or dumber. When really the issue is that we do not value knowledge. I think really the issue is that a lot of people don't know where to get their information from. We just came out of a global pandemic that was the largest spreader for mis and disinformation ever. I mean, I think that, or at least like, it showed us the mis and disinformation in a very fucking obvious way, especially because we were all trapped inside. I'm gonna say it did for me. I'm not like a, obviously I'm not like an authority. I think that because of the fact that academia teaches you that because you are an expert on a topic, that makes you an authority on a topic, then that actually came back and backfired, because now we're in this age where everybody's very anti-authoritarian. Everybody knows that there's something going on, that there's somebody that we shouldn't be listening to. People can tell that there are messages that are here to keep us where we are, but they don't know where it's coming from. And like I'm saying, like, COVID was one of those times where disinformation was so rapidly spread, not just by random people who didn't know what the fuck they were talking about, but also by experts who were in the pockets of billionaires. I don't get why we're so confused about why so many people don't want to listen to experts when literally our experts can be bought.
In 2022, Joe Biden declared the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. This was to the complete opposition of White House aides, with the top COVID-19 official of the White House literally saying the pandemic isn't over. This was amid hundreds of thousands of COVID deaths, at the time averaging to 400 a day. And even after multiple studies came out showing that carriers have a 10 to 30% chance of developing long COVID, where not only symptoms of COVID just don't go away, it also can cause damage to your internal organs, including your brain, your heart, and make you more prone to having strokes early in your life. That was it. Emergency over. There is no virus in Ba Sing Se. Considering the fact that the vast majority of those deeply entrenched in leftist circles barely even mention COVID except to reminisce on a lockdown that never really fully happened, I think it's time to admit that this anti-intellectualism shit can get the best of us. And if the highest man in office, the slightly less evil one, mind you, can spread misinformation that's so bad it ends up removing mandates and protections that were there even before the pandemic, I don't know, maybe it makes sense that some people are just not likely to trust people just because they're waving around some credentials. Completely related but unrelated, do y'all remember that episode of The Boondocks where Riley meets Bob Ross? Alright, so hear me out. Riley is graffitiing this mansion and Bob Ross ends up popping up out the bushes to catch his ass. But instead of actually snitching, he just helps him to spray paint the mansion better. So after Riley gets caught, Granddad figures that Riley needs some type of creative outlet, so he hires him an art instructor, who, surprise, surprise, ends up being Bob Ross. At first, he's just goading Riley into making better art on paper, because that was obviously the intended purpose of having a creative outlet that wasn't graffitiing mansions. But eventually, I guess Bob Ross just figures that Riley's best medium is the face of mansions. So he ends up bringing Riley from mansion to mansion, acting as his getaway driver to improve his art skills. And a lot of the resulting art are masterpieces. Like, the first piece was so beautiful that everybody in the neighborhood, all the white people, were in awe, gasping, not even like angry that a mansion was spray painted. The first picture Riley doesn't sign because Bob Ross is like, dude, no. The second work, Riley does actually sign, but a bunch of other people end up taking credit for it by signing their name right beside his. So Riley's getting pissed off at this point because he's not getting credit for his masterpieces that everybody's in awe of. And so he says to the crowd of people who are there in awe of his painting, yo, that was me. And so Riley is telling this crowd of people that he's actually the artist behind this painting. And they laugh at him. For one, because he's so young, but also because he's a little black boy. And they kind of spelled it out for us with Uncle Ruckus saying this.
Stop lying, boy, stop lying. Everybody knows niggas can't paint. Why you think all the great artists have all been white?
Eventually, Riley creates a work that only he could have created. And so, at the very least, his family knows that he is the masterful artist that he is. But the point is that art is a conversation between the audience and the artist that's privy to the audience's prejudices. After all, this random expert was the person who said it was a masterpiece, and it was the same expert that laughed in Riley's face and told him that it couldn't have possibly been him that painted the painting. And so even those who declare themselves experts, or that we consider experts, can be blinded by the lens of rightness. And this lens can then be used to systematically erase the talents and opinions of those who are not considered to be capable of complex and creative thought. See where I'm going here? Past Taj made it clear that we believe capital can have a huge factor in who is considered an expert, the way that experts give us information, and the information that is actually given from experts. But I think that there's also many other factors that go into it, including, race, ethnicity, gender, etc., reputation, etc., etc. Depending on the mouth that is speaking the words, we as people may be more or less likely to actually believe them, and the experts, as experts, may be more or less likely to give us that information straight up. I don't think that there's necessarily a culture here in the US that encourages distrust of experts in general. I mean, I think that experts of certain fields have been getting more scrutiny, that people have been realizing that they're human, can be swayed by greed, prejudices, and other desires. But honestly, when people start distrusting one expert, they just move on to trusting another one. It just changed from this snobbish guy to this. It is definitely true that America has a literacy problem that is very exclusive to this era of the media, and that those within leftist culture especially have the tendency to throw away the opinions and assessments from actual experts in favor of those who just feed into their confirmation bias. But I think that the issue is less about the literacy aspect and more about how trust can be manufactured and manipulated. In an interview that Hassan Minhaj conducted with the dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, Jelani Cobb, Minhaj poses this question.
According to a Pew survey, it found that nearly half of Americans get their news from social media. I actually think it's higher. But a third of adults under 30 get their news on TikTok. Does that scare you?
I think it challenges me, because here's one thing.
It terrifies me, Dean Cobb.
Sure. But here's the thing. Like, as we have kind of moved from, print, to radio, to television, to kind of digital and all the other kinds of iterations, there's always been a kind of learning curve, and there's always been a difficulty in translating what we learned in one medium onto the next medium.
Yes.
Right now, kind of anything goes. That's because so much is in flux and we haven't figured out how these things work. I suspect that there will be a point where we figured out at least some kinds of ground rules.
I lean more towards Cobb's reaction. I see this era of news dissemination to have its pros and cons. I actually think it's pretty cool that the internet has broken down some of the barriers that we used to have in accessing and receiving information. Though I wish that more of the general public would engage in traditional news sources, I think that it's beautiful that we can not only get the news, but we can engage in real-time conversations and reactions with each other. Journalism is a form of storytelling after all. It's dope to be able to have or be in an audience when it comes to staying informed. Being able to commiserate with so many people about the events that we're collectively experiencing is a gift, especially when in real life there's so many places where speaking on said events are taboo. But the pros and cons that I see in this new era of social media journalism are the pros and cons that I saw in traditional journalism amplified tenfold. Journalists were already encouraged to become brands rather than just news disseminators in order to keep their publishing houses afloat. Minaj also brought up the rise of the opinion or hit piece, bringing up how this might be a huge factor in the public's rising distrust of formal news media. Now, not only is the game more saturated, it's more sensationalist than ever. Topics only last for 2 or 3 days at a time, so you have to have the craziest headline in order to even actually grab anybody's attention. With it being more lucrative to be a grifter now than ever before, mis and disinformation spreads like wildfire from people who have no understanding or care for journalism ethics. Not only that, but the nature of social media is one of manufactured trust. That's what the forming of a parasocial relationship is. When journalists and experts become influencers, the audiences that they cultivate is based off their personality and not the legitimacy of their information. Like, be real, I know a lot of y'all who watch these leftist creators on YouTube and TikTok never go and actually check their sources. And I know, because bitch, I ain't either. I just like these creators, and so I trusted their word. I trusted that they did the research that they said they did, and they did it well. But I think that it's just important to remember that likability does not equal reliability. All the stuff that I just said is reality, though. We can't wrench the public away from social media any more than we can wrench rich people's money from formal news media. It's natural for people to lean on the parasocial relationships they cultivate through TikTok to get their information because we tend to listen to the people that we trust, and we tend to trust the people that we feel close to. So the only thing that we can really do is give the public the tools to be able to parse through who's actually worthy of that trust.
For people who cannot easily discern who has been bought and who hasn't, who has an agenda, who doesn't. For people who cannot easily discern that because they're not in that field, they don't know who to trust. And how are they supposed to just trust your word? We have this counterculture where it's just like, just trust me and listen to me because I am an authority on this topic. I have studied this topic. You should listen to me, and if you don't listen to me, you're stupid. The one thing that America has done, the one thing that America propaganda has done so well for every American here is to give us the fucking ego of a god. Like, literally, our egos are so big that it's constantly blinding us. All of us. I'm including myself in that. Like, I was one of those people who, like, I would try to bash people on the head with my intellect. I would be like, well, I researched this. I know this. You should be listening to me. Why would you not listen to me? That's stupid. What ego does a lot of the time is that when you are wrong about something, it makes it really, really hard to actually be able to accept that you're wrong about a thing. Especially if that person is sitting here trying to make it be something about your personhood. You're stupid. You're stupid for not believing me. As soon as you hear that, as soon as your ego hears that, you shut down. You're gonna stop thinking about it. I'm not stupid. I'm not stupid. So obviously this person must be lying. Because I know I'm not dumb. I know they're not talking to my ass. I know I'm not stupid. It's weird because our culture does genuinely value brawn over brains a lot of the time, especially like in coming of age films. So a lot of the media that we consumed growing up showed that. A lot of the media that we were consumed growing up showed the bullies being these big, strong people bullying weak and like mentally strong people. Like that's the media that we saw. But at the same time, we're also taught through our media that it's not okay to be dumb. It's not okay to not know things. If you don't know things, that actually makes you a dumb and ignorant and almost, honestly, bad person. Because you're ignorant, you're a bad person. So I think that I've been getting like very, very annoyed and with this kind of elitism on the left. And I don't think, I'm not gonna sit here and act like be like, oh, that's the reason why nobody wants to listen to you, blah, 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 blah. But I also think that it blinds you. Like, I think that Ego blinds you to so many things. I think that it's weird that we have such a focus on intellect, on stupidity, and not a focus on conditioning and recognizing how conditioning can shut down thinking receptors. Because we know this. We know that if you're conditioned and propagandized over time, that you're more prone to black and white thinking. We know that American culture, America's propaganda is so insidious that it's specifically made in a way to make it not seem like propaganda. We know how poor our education system is. I understand we all went to school, but also all of our schools were not the same. All of our schools were not the same. I think that we all need to remember that. We all need to remember how vastly different our schools are depending on where the fuck we're at. Depending on not even just where we're at in the States, but where we're at, what town we're in. We grew up in a poor ass fucking town, like with a public school that like was underfunded as fuck, and you think that people are gonna know big words?
When you think about ego, what do you think of? Do you think of selfishness? Of egotistical sensibilities like vanity? Or are you thinking of narcissist? Maybe, more likely, you're thinking about death. Ego colloquially is used to describe traits in a person that are, how do I put this, little assholey. When someone describes themselves or somebody else as having a big ego, they typically mean that they have an air of confidence that's almost to the point of arrogance. They're the people who walk around like they shit don't stink, and more often than not, this confidence is seen as undeserved. Having a big ego or an ego at all really is seen as a negative, or at the very least, something that you have to keep in check. And there's some truth to that. An unchecked ego will certainly leave you with the head blown up so big that you can no longer see the ground. But that's the thing. Ego doesn't just affect the way that you see yourself, it affects the way that you perceive others, reality. You won't just be overly confident in your abilities, you will believe that everything that you see as truth is. When you believe yourself to be infallible, you are blind to not just your own flaws, but to other people's strengths. The left has an unchecked ego problem, as does the rest of American culture. It's not just in the way that we talk to each other during a disagreement, it's in the way that we go about spreading our ideas at all. We are the people with the facts, and so as the people with the facts, it's completely illogical for you to think anything other than what I think. And don't get me wrong, the first part is usually true, but it just doesn't lead into the second part the way that y'all think it does. You guys, people are legitimately living in different realities than you are. Like, not just in the way that we filter the world through our experiences. I'm not talking about how we can see color differently. I'm talking about the actual physical realities surrounding them. You can cite stats about a booming economy and Biden creating more jobs all day, but there was little to nothing in our physical reality to show for that. You can say Trump is a real threat, the things he's saying he's going to really try to do, and those affected in his first term won't believe you until they see the chaos for themselves. You can tell people Kamala is the lesser of two evils, voting is a tool, just vote for her, idiots. But those who have just had their entire lineage exterminated overseas by American bombs are not going to listen to you. We can talk about lack of education, we can talk about illiteracy, we can talk about Americans being dumb all day, but there are plenty of college-educated, literate-ass people who will reject scientific and expert consensus because their physical realities do not match up. In fact, I think that the headassery in this regard from college-educated people is worse because they will literally just invent reasons for why they're right. There was this episode of Assassination Classroom that genuinely completely shifted my perception of myself. Stick with me here. In episode 16, Class E, the bad kid class, are trying to beat out Class A in final exam scores. They know they can't beat all of them in overall academics, so instead they divide themselves into groups, with each group focusing on one subject that plays to their strengths. The kids take this very seriously, almost as serious as the assassination of their teacher, Koro-sensei. Well,
all of the kids except for Karma Akabane, a student who takes literally nothing seriously. He's not in Class E because of his academic performance like many of his peers are, rather because of his poor behavior and propensity for violence. And it is because of this fact that he routinely skips out on both academic and assassination training, thinking that he can just ride on his luck and intellect. Well, this predictably results in him not only failing to attain the top spot in his subject, math, but he actually scores significantly lower than all of his other peers that he had previously cleared no problem. And so Koro-sensei kind of bitchingly chides him, calling out his laziness and making fun of him for attempting to rely on his strengths that he was failing to cultivate. And though at the time this very obviously upsets Karma, this failure causes a notable shift in his character that is highlighted in the next few episodes. In episode 19, when the class takes on a higher hitman, Koro-sensei says,
Karma, stop! Not so fast, Mr. Karasa. The boy's chin is down. Karma typically enters a fight with his chin angled upward. It shows disdain. He's literally looking down his nose at his opponent. This is different. True, his words may be dripping with arrogance, but his eyes are staring daggers. He's alert, locking his opponent's gaze. Finals were quite a blow to his precious ego, but I suspect he's taken the lessons of that failure to heart.
Karma's big-ass head was not just causing him to flounder academically, it also made him unable to properly assess his enemies. It wasn't until he shed this superiority complex that he was able to see those around him clearly, enabling him to acknowledge others as peers and himself as flawed. By now being able to perceive both his and others' physical reality, he was able to refine his strengths, become a better student and leader, and become a better assassin. But it took putting his head down, looking his enemy in the eyes, and seeing them for the person that they are. The common idea that is thought about ego is that you must kill it. Experience ego death for you to see reality as it truly is. I tend to disagree. After all, an egoless being is one that has lost themselves, having no sense of self outside of the general collective. Not only do I believe it to be impossible, as our lived reality on Earth means that all of our experiences are filtered through our own unique lenses, I believe it's reckless, it's misguided, it's cruel. Your ego is not a separate entity, it's you. Your ego is the part of you that commands respect, that knows it's worth something, that fights and angers for you. Your ego holds your dignity and your pride. Killing it is killing you. But when you find yourself ruled by it, when you find yourself blinded, it's time to put your head down and find some ground beneath your feet. It's time to guide it back to safety, because the reason that your ego takes over is to shield you from the pain of imperfection. Those who are consistently and constantly calling others stupid or the R slur are those who have had those same insults hurled against themselves the most. You can't be the stupid ones when you're the one who's giving the call. IQ ain't real, and intelligence is hella subjective and revocable, at least to the general public. If you want to correctly discern your enemies from your allies, hold your ego tight and tell it, hey, you can be a dumb fuck too. I'm joking. Tell it that the same talent that resides in you, that same cup of God, is the same talent that resides in all of humanity. And the same ignorance and darkness that you see plighting the rest of humanity, well, it plights you as well. People are mirrors, after all. What you see is your reflection. That's just me, though. Thank you for watching to the end. I hesitate to say it's good to be back because I feel like every time I say the word back, I am immediately thrown into the shadow realm and stuck there for another 2 fucking years. So instead, hit that like button and subscribe down below. Hit that like button and subscribe down below for more videos of me talking about things that I care about. Stick around on my channel for a little bit. I have other videos that I think are gems. I think they're pretty good. They're probably popping up on screen right now. This is TMG signing out. Peace.